Hello and welcome to this special episode of the Rural Roundup, one of a 6-part series called Unsung Heroes. I'm Calum Johnston, and in this episode I visit Heather Close at Littleton Farm, where we discussed outwintering. Through speaking to Heather, it was clear to me that on her beef farm, the unsung hero is biodiversity. Now, many farmers would be aghast at the thought of weeds on their farm, but actually thistles and nettles are the real unsung hero here. Later in the episode, I'll be joined by a colleague of mine, James Orr, an agricultural advisor with a special interest in the carbon footprint of livestock systems, who will tell us more about this unsung hero, the benefits, things to know if you're considering it, and also the positive impact that it could have on your farm or croft, or on the planet. Heather, thanks very much for joining us on the podcast this afternoon. First of all, can you introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about the home farm?
Hi, Calum. My name's Heather Close. I farm with my father in a place called Littleton. It's a farm right on the coast near Turnberry in South Ayrshire in southwest Scotland. Dad bought the farm in the 1990s. I spent most of my life, late 1990s, I spent most of my life engineering and in project management. I moved up to the farm in 2019. As Dad had said he could do with a bit of a hand, and I thought, why not? And luckily my husband, my recently acquired husband, Scott, agreed to the move. I work part-time on the farm, 3 or 4 days on the farm. I'm also a consultant with Pasture for Life. And yeah, I've started painting again, as you might be able to see behind me. Not quite ready to call myself an artist, but I'm enjoying the painting. We run a suckler herd of 40 to 50 cows. They're mostly Aberdeen Angus with a few Hereford cattle. The Aberdeen Angus are a mixture of Dad's original herd, which he had started in early 2000s, and some native Angus that we've bought more recently. All cattle are raised outside all year round, and they eat only forage, even the bulls. I don't see why they should get special treatment when they do less work than the cows. We wean the calves in February, so the cows have the calves with them over winter, and that's around the time the cows start kicking the calves off anyway. We have a nice tight calving window. The bulls are with the cows for 6.5 weeks. And most of the calves for the last couple of years certainly have been born in the first 4 weeks of that window. So we're doing well. We're in a slightly wetter part of the UK with an average rainfall of 1,072 millimetres. The first winter I moved up, the first year I moved up, we had 1,500 millimetres of rain and 300 mil in a very wet February, which was quite an introduction to outwintering.
Now, just sort of rewinding a step, just briefly for a second, so the farm's Littleton, but Balsar Glen, where does that name Balsar Glen come from?
There is a glen called Balsar Rock Glen on the farm, and so Balsar Rock is a shortened version. Balsar Glen, is a shortened version of that. When a few years ago I started selling beef boxes on the farm, which we unfortunately no longer do, but there are many Littletons farms. It's a popular name, especially in the area. There's one 10 miles away from us, and then there was another farm that was called Little Turnberry Farm. So for clarity, I changed the name for marketing purposes to Balsar Glen. Very
good, and it stands out. It stands out in quite a busy market.
It's quite nice. Yeah, it's a nice name.
Yeah. Now, so you mentioned you came back to the farm in 2019 to give Dad a hand. What would you say have been the main changes that you've made to the farm since 2019 then?
To be honest, Dad had done an awful lot beforehand. Like he'd gone to, he was out wintering the cattle. He was rotationally grazing. What I have added in the last few years is Dad's not a great fan of spreadsheets, and grazing planning requires some kind of planning, especially when you're out wintering, because you're spending the whole year basically building up your stockpile for the winter grazing. So our barn full of hay silage is out in the fields. So I have to manage that really carefully. And so a spreadsheet, like it's not a complicated spreadsheet, but you're planning out where the cows are going to be roughly and adapting it as you go along. And then you'll also have a reference from the previous year as to where they actually were. So that's helped. And from doing that, we've managed to increase the rest period between grazing, and we're also gradually increasing the amount of animals we can carry over winter. Because that's our pinch point. It's easy to carry cattle, It's relatively easy to carry cattle in the summer when the ground's relatively dry and the grass is growing. But kind of come winter, that's your pinch point. By the time middle of October, end of October has come, that's the grass that you have for the year. And then also I've done quite a lot with the breeding selection over the last few years as well.
So on breed selection, you mentioned you've got Anguses. Is that specifically for outwintering, or what was your reasons for the Anguses in particular?
Dad's reasons for the Anguses was outwintering. Well, to be fair, when he bought the farm, he did put up a little barn, and he had chosen the Angus before then. So for him, it was I think the conformation, like it's a good robust animal. Conformation's good, and then he also had some wee Anguses when he was a boy in the States, so he's got a fondness for them anyway.
Like many farmers do, they attach onto them. Yeah,
they are lovely. Yeah, or I'm partial to a Hereford as well.
So the cattle are out all the time. Then talk me through your outwintering system. I'm trying to visualize it. Talk me through what you do.
Well, for example, right now is kind of the transition period when we go from grazing grass that we might graze again in the spring to grass that we probably won't graze again till May or June. And we have electric fences. So the farm is 136 hectares in total. 15 or so of that is woods, and the rest we graze. Each field is divided up using temporary fence posts into 1 hectare paddocks, large paddocks, and then we'll put electric fence out to divide those and then further subdivide them depending on the number of animals and what time of year it is and what we want to achieve from the grazing.
Yeah, so you've divvied up the field. How many cattle will you run in that 1 hectare paddock?
It will vary. So in the springtime, say after calving, when the cows are just getting out, so towards the end of May, getting out like away from the barns. Not that we calve in the barns, but we keep them close to the barns for calving, just in case. The grass is growing quickly, and so we will start the cows on quite a quick rotation. So there might be 40, 50 cows and followers on a 1 hectare paddock for one day. And then we will move them to the next paddock and the next paddock and the next paddock, and we'll go around quite quickly. So spring, we do tend to graze around quite quickly. And there are certain fields, if they're quite steep fields or a bit wet, we might only graze them that once, and then we'll graze them again kind of November, December. So they have a bit of a trim in spring, and then they build up a nice big deep stockpile, which will help hold the cattle up in the winter. And they'll have put down deep roots, which do a very good job of holding the cattle up as well. So you've got the sward that's compressed and the roots underneath holding the cattle up.
Why did you move to this outwintering system? Was it with climate change in mind, or was it mainly for sort of farm efficiency on first hand? What was the driver for it, Heather?
Dad's driver for it was he didn't want to spend money on a new barn. He built this barn. He had his cows. He wanted to grow the herd. The barn he thought was quite big when he built it. He realized it wasn't going to hold as many animals as he wanted quite quickly. So he started out wintering. And bearing in mind, this was 2010, 11, I think he started out wintering. So there were very few people doing it at the time. so it was a cost saving or cost cutting, cost efficiency reasons behind that one. And for me, I'm quite risk averse. I don't want to be worrying about like the weather is variable enough as it is. That has a big impact on farming. I personally don't want to be worrying about when I should be planting crops or applying fertilizer. Cutting haylage is enough of a should we go this week, next week for me. So it's working. It's a simple system. You can control the things that you can control, and the rest you don't really have to worry about too much. The weather will do what it's going to do, and you just have to have backup plans.
Yeah, weather's just an uncontrollable factor that
exactly.
everyone has to live with.
60 mil overnight. Brilliant. Thank you.
Oh, great. Yeah. So actually, just on that, you mentioned you're in quite a wet area. Do you notice a lot of poaching on the ground?
There is a little bit. That's inevitable. In small areas, like most of the grass, the thick sward, like it comes to October, and this big tall grass, which you can't, I'm showing you how high the grass is. So a foot tall sward of grass, 18 inches to whatever, just flops over and you look like you've got no grass left. But that grass is all compressed, and that's a good 2-3 inches of solid compressed grass leaves and the roots underneath that will hold the cows up. I'm not going to say we don't get poaching. I work as hard as I can to avoid it, but there's always going to be the odd occasion when it happens, but it's relatively small areas. So one thing we had was we use back latch gates, which are automatic solar powered gates. We tend to have a 5-6 in the morning break for the cows, which we're not willing to get up for, so we use the back latch for that. But when we had a back latch in the evening, and the cows were walking through that for a good 12 hours, if not 18 hours, and that got really pugged. So we've changed the system, so we only use that in the early morning, so they walk through it for 2 or 3 hours rather than the whole day. And also, even if, like, as we talked about, you can't account for the weather. So if there's an unexpected inch of rain overnight, there's going to be a little bit of pugging. But we then rest that field, or that area would naturally get rested. We aren't giving it special treatment. It will always get rested for 2 or 3 months, if not 6 or 10 months. We graze most fields twice a year. So we have started grazing 2 or 3, a couple of fields more regularly, say every 8 weeks, to mix things up a bit. But that area is very unlikely to have the same impact the next winter, because we're moving the cattle each day and we're going around the farm in a different rotation. That will probably not see that impact again, hopefully, for like another decade or something. It's very isolated, so it's far less than 1% of the farm that's been affected, 0.001%. And it's the chances of that having that same impact the next year are minimal. So, yeah. And you have thistles, which help. Thistles heal the ground.
If you're increasing the rest period then on your grass, what sort of benefits have you seen through outwintering on your grass and soil health then?
Well, firstly, to outwinter successfully, you need to focus on your soil health. Like you need the soil health to outwinter. Otherwise, there is far greater risk of poaching. The extended rest periods help build deeper roots, and also Dad stopped applying fertilizer just before I moved up, so we haven't applied a fertilizer since 2018, and he'd been dropping down the amount he applied for a good 5 years before that. And that, by avoiding the fertilizer, that allows the plants that would otherwise have done the job of fertilizer, so the nitrogen fixers, the other plants that communicate with the soil microbes, the diversity of species, some of which people would call weeds, but are generally, they're all beneficial, and they're all doing a job. They just get a bad press. So they're all there, and they're all part of creating a healthy, diverse sward which feeds the soil. And gradually over time that soil will improve and you'll be able to carry a bit more as you outwinter. And the process is slow. It does take a while. There are no quick fixes.
Would your outwintering system work in other parts of the country, and what would farmers need to consider?
I think take it slowly. Like, it sounds simple, but grazing in the winter is different from grazing in the summer. There's a lot fewer guardrails. So I would start by extending your grazing season by a week or 2 or 3. And so you've always have backup. So generally most farmers will have barns. So try it for a bit longer and then put the cows into the barn or woods or whatever you have available. I would look at rotational grazing to build up that sward. I would say work towards a 30-day minimum cycle, recovery period, rest period. And you'll see you have more grass ahead of you. I would, if you can, I'd move cows every day, but probably every 2 or 3 days would probably work. We need to remember that the humans that run the farm are also part of the system. So my dad loves being out in the field and moving the cows every day. And I do too, but if it was just me, I might move them every couple of days rather than every single day. So you've got to factor in what you want out of the system as well. In Perth, you've probably got less rainfall than we do here, I would be guessing. So, I mean, bale grazing is an option here. We roll out the bales. There's no real difference. We have to be more careful of pugging. But then saying that, the last couple of years, you guys have had some pretty heavy rainfall events.
Yeah, I mean, I think just generally, I think it's perhaps fair to say that across Scotland, we're now experiencing quite significant impacts from climate change. I think, we're certainly, even on our family farm at home in Perth, as prolonged dry or prolonged wet spells can have a big impact, not only on the ground, but on livestock as well. Would you say that the sort of change to your outwintering system has allowed the farm to become a bit more climate resilient, would you say?
Yes. And that the pugging, I'm not quite sure where pugging and where just like normal cow indents in softish mud happens, but we have, so our fields don't get rolled unless they're being cut for silage, and we rotate which fields get cut for silage. So our fields are bumpy, like they have shallow but imprints from cow footprints in there. And we had one of your colleagues over actually a couple of years ago, and we were talking about that, and I said, it was a bit wet when they were in here. And then the comment was, well, that slows down the rain, the water fall from the fields, because if you have flat, beautifully rolled fields, that rainfall is going to run straight off them. Whereas if you have the little indents, which cows naturally make, that slows down the run. So that's just one thing. But also because we're focusing on outwintering, we're growing taller grass, deeper roots. That's helping retain the topsoil. We are lucky enough that we are fully permanent pasture, and I would not recommend outwintering if you're not on permanent pasture. That's a whole different game.
No, I think there's certainly lots of benefits. There's lots of pros to it, perhaps some considerations as you've touched on. I think perhaps one of the things that stands out is that kind of co-benefit of not only improving biodiversity, what can be achieved in, you say quite a wet area, improving grassland, improving soils, but also improving cattle health, welfare, and ultimately profitability, farm profitability at the end of it. So as far as I can see, it's a win-win all round, really. And I think just to sort of wrap up is, thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and I wish you and your dad all the very best with it.
Thank you very much, Calum. Great to talk to you.
Welcome to the podcast, James. How are you getting on today?
Thank you. It's good to be here. I'm good, thank you.
So based on Heather's outwintering system, what is your viewpoint on the benefits of it?
So outwintering's a very good option if you can do it. It's well, I mean, there's real upfront cost savings if you can reduce your housing requirements. If you don't need to build that extra shed, for example, especially the price of buildings just now. So there's a real benefit up front in terms of your fixed costs. You don't need as much shed space if you can manage to outwinter them. Outwintering isn't going to be an option for everybody. Outwintering works best on lighter soils such as sandy soils, where they're a bit more free draining. It's maybe still an option for farms that are a bit heavier, but it's going to be a bit more difficult to manage. With outwintering, you're going to also benefit from reduced resource use during the winter period. You're not going to need to bed the cattle, so you'll have cost savings there. But really, there's a point with outwintering if you're considering doing it where you have to consider the soil health. There's a point there where you're going to be doing more damage to the soil with the cattle trampling the ground than is beneficial. Then it will outweigh the benefits. Okay, so it's ideal for cattle to be outwintered. They're naturally bred to be outwintered. We don't actually, even though most cattle are housed during the winter, it's not really primary reason, in my opinion anyway, it's not for the cattle's benefit that they're wintered inside. It is more for the ground that we winter them inside. I mean, a cow's ideal ambient temperature, if you exclude wind chill and any kind of rain factors, it is about 5 degrees Celsius is their ideal ambient temperature. So for most of the winter, they would be quite comfortable outside. Okay, particularly with breeds that Heather's using, the more kind of native type breeds that tend to be a bit hairier and a bit more able to cope with the weather conditions in Scotland.
Now, Heather also touched upon, I think she said at one point that her and her father, they haven't applied fertiliser since 2018. So there's clearly, as you say, there's benefits to soil health and farm profitability. I mean, we've seen in the past number of years the prices of fertiliser going up. I mean, surely that's a benefit of the outwintering type system.
In an outwintering scenario, there is benefits for soil health, as all the excreta from the livestock, all the dung and urine is directly applied to the land. So there's a saving in terms of you're not having to pay the local contractor or pay for the fuel and the machinery yourself to actually spread it on the land. So there's a carbon saving to that as well as a financial saving. In addition to that, Heather had mentioned that they'd started doing rotational grazing. So, I mean, rotational grazing is fantastic. I mean, some studies have shown you can produce up to an extra 50% more forage through rotational grazing. So if you think about how grass developed over thousands of years as a species, it was used to kind of large kind of herds of herbivores moving through the area, and what they'd do is they'd kind of totally rump an area before moving on. So rotational grazing is really just kind of mimicking that kind of natural grazing system, allowing a large number of stock into a field, totally rumping it down and allowing them to move on. So in a set stocking scenario where there's a kind of lower density of livestock on a field for a kind of longer period of time, what the animals actually do is they selectively graze. So they will pick the tastiest bit of grass and continually eat the tastier grass and leave the kind of less tasty, lower nutrition grass. And what that does is actually favours that poorer grass type, so they don't actually get the same grazing pressure. So what actually happens is the nicer, tastier grass, which we want to keep in the swards, dies out because it's getting unfavourably pressured, and the poorer types of grass get to live on, and your sward just becomes poorer and poorer. So rotational grazing is very good because it kind of forces the cattle to eat everything before they're allowed to move on to the next field. So that's they've probably seen a real benefit from that. So that is in terms of, well, it's allowed them to not spread fertilizer, which is a massive saving financially, and also a saving in terms of your carbon footprint. But it's also allowed them to probably produce more kilograms of livestock per hectare.
From your experience, James, as an agricultural consultant, you're out and about on farms all the time. Are you seeing more farms moving to rotational grazing and outwintering?
Absolutely. So in terms of outwintering, I think everyone who can possibly do it is trying to do it. So if farms, typically an area I work in, which is also in the kind of Ayrshire, Renfrewshire regions, it is a high rainfall area, so it is quite challenging to outwinter cattle. Especially a lot of heavier soils in the area operate in as well. So it is a challenge, but if folk have kind of rocky knolls or kind of more extensive hills, they're certainly doing it and it's working very well for them. And then as you get to the coast, there's people with some more sandy type soils and they're doing it as well. In terms of rotational grazing, there's a lot of interest among farmers in rotational grazing systems. It has been supported by the Scottish Government in recent grant schemes, so you could get your electric fencing that would allow you to do your rotational grazing grant funded. So it is definitely, particularly in the dairy sector, I would say it's becoming the norm. That a lot of dairy farmers are doing kind of more rotational grazing or strip grazing, and certainly it's becoming very common within the sheep sector as well. A lot of sheep farmers are doing a more rotational grazing system, and typically those sheep farmers also have beef cattle, so they're quite often doing leader-follower systems where whatever either the cattle or the sheep are their priority, they're going first, getting the first bite at the grass, and then the other animals are following behind them to clean the field up, which means basically you're going to be producing more grass on the same land area. You'll also benefit from savings in terms of you won't have to, if you're properly grazing the ground, you won't have to do as much kind of grass management in your tractor and your mower. You won't have to do as much topping if it's done right. So there's tangible benefits in terms of resource use and increased production as well.
You touched earlier on breeds that work best perhaps to outwintering, and certainly Heather and her father, they like the Anguses and also the native breeds. From your experience, James, what breeds work best? Are there any particular characteristics?
Yeah, so characteristics of breeds that are going to work well in an outwintering system, it is the more native type cattle you're going to want to go with. So breeds like the Aberdeen Angus, Herefords, Salers are all quite popular in those systems. What you're looking for in your cattle, for them to be able to handle that system, to be outside in the winter and still perform, still produce, as you are looking for kind of cattle that are a bit hairier. Typically you want the cattle that are lower live weight as well, so you want the cattle to be not as small as possible, but there needs to be a balance between production and the value of the cattle and the value of their offspring, but also in terms of their impact on the ground. So so you're not going to see the kind of big continental breeds being outwintered because they're not as hairy and they're a lot heavier typically. So hairier and a bit lighter. So native breeds do work very well for that.
Hairier and lighter, that's the key, James. I like that. If I'm a farmer listening to this, which I'm sure many will be, what advice would you give me if I'm thinking about starting out wintering?
So if you're starting out wintering, you need to properly assess the kind of the benefits and disadvantages, because outwintering systems do have that. So on the benefits side, you're going to have reduced housing requirements and infrastructure costs that go along with that. So there are savings to be made there. You could also free up housing for other uses. So you could potentially use that shed for something else, which could bring in income as well. you're probably going to experience also benefit from lower feeding and bedding costs. So since the cattle aren't inside, they're outside, they're able to eat the grass that's there. You will have to adjust your grazing system to ensure that there is enough grazing left over for them in the winter period, which Heather talked about. But certainly you're going to save money in that side of things. You might also lower your disease risk as well. So diseases are pretty prevalent in cattle housing systems, whereas if they're outside, things are a lot fresher. The risk of infection is going to be a bit lower. However, you're also going to have some disadvantages. So you might struggle for access in bad weather. So in severe weather conditions, you might struggle for access to get feed to your cattle. So that could cause you some headaches as well, So it's maybe an idea to make sure that your farm tracks are up to scratch, so you've got access to these fields to ensure that you can feed the cattle when they're outside. And as Heather said, to have a kind of backup plan if the weather becomes too bad. You're also going to have to consider the kind of damage that this system could do to the soil. So you could probably see, in wet conditions anyway, you're going to see poaching, which because of the kind of rest periods that are involved in a rotational grazing system, the swards, the grass itself is actually going to be able to fix a bit of that for you. Since it's getting it's going to get a good rest. It's not under constant pressure from being grazed constantly. The pasture is going to be able to repair itself a little bit, but certainly if it's extremely poor weather, you might risk poaching it, and you might require to have a kind of mechanical intervention. A quite common way of outwintering, particularly through the East Coast, it's not so common in the West Coast, is what they call a sacrifice field. So they'll have a rotation, say a 25-year reseeding rotation, and the field that's going to be chosen for outwintering is a field that's going to get reseeded the following year. So it doesn't really, the kind of damage that's done is going to get corrected anyway. Another thing you need to watch out for if you are going to be outwintering is you need to monitor your stock closely. You need to be watching for any body condition loss and any kind of animal welfare issues that can arise from cattle standing in kind of wet, muddy conditions for long periods, particularly with young calves. Young calves they're not able to regulate their temperature like adult cattle are. So you need to watch them and make sure that they are they're looked after. It is quite common that if you're doing an outwintering system and the weather gets really adverse, it's probably going to be the young calves that you end up. They're the reason that you decide to bring your cattle in at some points during the outwintering period. There's also some kind of risks with regards to parasites from grazing for longer outside. So doing more outwintering, you could see kind of higher risk of things like liver fluke and that. But the key thing is farmers listening, they will know their own farm. They'll know what it's capable of. It's useful to talk to other farmers that are doing outwintering, find out what they're doing, what kind of challenges they've had, how they've tackled those challenges, and of course you can talk to your local advisor as well to see what kind of things what folk are doing in your area.
Now, Heather speaks very positively about thistles, the fact that thistles are deep-rooting, but also nettles and the benefits that nettles can bring too. I wonder if you could just perhaps touch on that. Yeah.
So Heather's she's came from a kind of another industry back into farming, so she does benefit from that kind of a bit of freedom there, that she's able to look at things differently from maybe somebody that went into farming straight from school. So thistles like other plants, they actually do like quite nutritious ground. They like good ground. Obviously farmers see them as weed, but thistles growing in your field actually is also a sign of good soil health. Thistles have quite a deep taproot. So that kind of the issues that can be caused by overwintering, like the poaching and that, thistles are actually capable of helping the soil structure. and well, thistles and nettles. So nettles are an important source of foraging for bees and other insects during the shoulders of the season. So when we're getting into the autumn and the flowers are starting to disappear, that these plants are actually quite important for biodiversity and as a food source for small insects, in particular bees.
James, before we wrap up, if there was one key takeaway about outwintering, what would it be?
I would say the one key takeaway with outwintering is you need to watch you strike that balance between protecting the soil health as well as and kind of getting the benefits of outwintering. So outwintering's great as long as it's not at the expense of your soil health. You can cause yourself a lot of problems if you don't strike that balance correctly and actually do more harm than good. But it's certainly outwintering it's great if you can do it.
And also, we've touched quite a lot on some of the practical benefits to the farm, and looking at Heather's particular case. But what are also some of the benefits in respect of climate change and becoming a bit more resilient to climate change?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're outwintering, in terms of your carbon footprint, anyway, in terms of your carbon footprint, you're going to have reduced resource uses. So you're not going to be using as much purchased bedding, and you're probably not going to be using as much fuel or electricity that it would take to run a house system. So you're going to benefit both financially from that, but that also has a carbon saving as well, and not having to use that. In terms of carbon on the ground as well, so that in your soil. So I mean, Heather was talking about rotational grazing. So rotational grazing has been proven to help enhance soil health and sequester organic carbon in the soil. So, I mean, there has been research done on the impact of grass-based beef systems and outwintering on farms' carbon footprints, and some of those studies have found a reduction in the carbon footprint by up to 26%. Heather had touched on biodiversity as well, so the biodiversity benefits from that kind of from the way she views plants and their role in the natural systems, which are sometimes viewed as weeds by other people. I mean, all these plants do have an important role in the ecological systems that take place on our farms.
James, it's great to get your input and thoughts into all of this, not just from Heather's case, but also just your experience, because even in your day-to-day role, you're out and about on farms and you're seeing a lot of different enterprises, so you can see the benefits, you can also see the challenges that a lot of farmers are facing. And clearly, from this particular case, there's tangible benefits of outwintering system. There's benefits to soil health, reducing the need for sheds, reducing feeding and bedding costs, the ability to sequester carbon, and there's also real biodiversity gains to be had too. So there's lots of good stuff. James, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon, and I wish you well.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us for this special episode of the Rural Roundup. Check out the other 5 episodes of the Unsung Heroes series, all available to listen wherever you normally do right now. If you'd like to get in touch or find out more about anything that we've discussed in the podcast, head to the show notes. This episode was presented by me, Calum Johnston, produced by Kerry Hammond, and edited by Cameron Walsh in association with the Scottish Government.